Good morning, Mark.
Good morning. Good morning.
Thank you for giving me your time. I know that you're retired, but I've also noticed that you're still very busy with lots of activities. And we discussed one today, that you're learning Greek, but I know you're also involved in a lot of other activities. Before we jump into questions, I just want to state that I watched some interviews. There are plenty of interviews of you online on various subjects, and I would recommend anybody listening to this interview today that they go and do a search, and they can find Mark Moody-Stuart. Just type that into Google, and they can find lots of information about you. And then I also want to thank you for sending your book, and which is Responsible Leadership. And I've started to dip into that and picking out some nuggets in there. And I would recommend people to buy that book, also to get further background. And there's a lovely section in the back, which is the kind of about your family beginnings and your progress in your career. And it would be great if you could maybe just summarize that for us.
Yes, certainly. Thank you very much. And it's good to be here. I was born in the Caribbean. I'm the youngest of 6 children. My mother's family had lived in Antigua for hundreds of years. And my father fought in the First World War and was quite badly wounded and sent out by his father to look after sugar plantations in Antigua. So my 2 paternal grandfathers, one set up the sugar factory and one built the sugar factory. So I lived a happy childhood there on a sugar estate, was educated in England, went to university, studied geology. I joined Shell. I'm a sedimentary geologist, and the sort of geology I was interested in, doing research in the Arctic, was of interest to Shell because of the sandstone reservoirs in the northern North Sea. So I joined Shell as an exploration geologist, and then gradually did various jobs in 8 or 9 different countries in exploration for about 10 years, and then in general management and so on, and eventually landed up as what was known in Shell as chairman of the Committee of Managing Directors. It's actually a collective management. The chairman is just that, is a bit like the clerk of a Quaker meeting, making sure that everyone, and you don't have agreement until everyone's agreed, which made Shell quite a slow-moving beast, but actually gave it enormous strengths, in my opinion.
Thank you. That leads me to a question, which is interesting. I didn't know that. And what's the background there with Shell? Because that's not normally the corporate structure, as I would understand it, in a lot of corporations.
No, you're quite right. It isn't normal. It was set up in the 60s. Shell was a joint venture between a Dutch company, Royal Dutch Shell, Royal Dutch, sorry, and Shell Transport and Trading. And they had 2 different origins. They came together in the Far East in Indonesia, and the structure was set up so that although it was a 60-40, 60% Royal Dutch and 40% Shell Transport, it was actually a joint venture. And the joint venture was run by what's basically an executive committee of what were called managing directors, which came from both the Dutch side and the British side. And the chairman of the managing directors was a first among equals, basically. So it wasn't a hierarchy, very far from the US chief executive, who's, all supreme, very much consultative. any member of the managing directors could say at any moment, in fact, within Shell, throughout Shell, you could say at any moment, hey, I don't quite like that. What's that? And people wouldn't simply say, shut up and get on with the job. They'd say, well, why is it? And can we do something which overcomes your discomfort? So it was indeed a different sort of approach to management, and a bit more Quakerly, not in terms of Quaker business method, silences, etc., but just the approach to management, with the chief being not a boss but a first among equals. It's a very powerful method, and I recommend it to. I think all executive committees should be run like that. They should be run as teams with a team captain, a team leader, but with who calls on different members of the team to play their parts.
Yeah, it's in today's environment, yeah, that's a kind of would be considered to be quite radical, and I guess it was radical, yeah, back at the time and in general.
I think it was, and it operated very successfully for 6 or 7 decades. There is, I think, a slight tendency now to revert to, now the two companies have merged, and there is now a somewhat more normal chief executive and executive committee. But I would hope that the principles continue, because it's perfectly possible to have a chief executive and an executive committee where the chief executive is a leader and a steerer of discussion and business.
Yeah, it's again, we're veering off where we're going with the interview, but I think it's a worthwhile exploring as well. And it kind of reminds me, as you're talking, it's more of a Nordic kind of approach, where my understanding of the other Nordic countries is that that's how they operate. There isn't the kind of command and control, for want of a better description. It's about consultation and listening.
Yes, I think so. I don't know that the analogy is complete,
Yeah.
but certainly the Nordic system has much to recommend it, not least the attention to remuneration and not having the enormous differentials which we in Europe have fallen into following the United States, which is truly impossible and highly corrosive and destructive.
We could spend about a week talking about that, and so we
one
will.
of the challenges.
Yeah, we will pull ourselves back from that one, and maybe we can discuss that another time. But today we have an agenda, and for the listeners, I'm hoping to break this into a 3-part interview, so that you can kind of watch in short bursts. And so with that, thank you for the background, and let's kind of go to a kind of defining moment, I believe, and that you can kind of elaborate upon, which is 1995 and what happened in that year. And so I'll leave you to kind of give us some sort of background on that, and let you freewheel on it.
1995 was a very difficult year for Shell. There was an environmental crisis issue, the disposal of Brent Spar, a storage buoy in the deep waters of the Atlantic, often misquoted as in the North Sea. But there was a lot of outcry about that. And also in Nigeria, the execution of Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was well known to many people in Shell and who was a great critic of Shell and a vociferous proponent of autonomy for the Ogoni people. And in both cases, even some of our supporters thought that we had not handled them very well. So we'd called for a fair trial for Ken Saro-Wiwa, but limited activity to that. Arising out of that, we had had in Shell since the 70s a set of what were known as Shell General Business Principles, which had been drafted by a member of the then executive committee. And it was very advanced. It considered our responsibilities to shareholders, to what would now be called other stakeholders, employees, customers, civil society, governments, etc. So they were very advanced and very well penetrated through the company. If you asked anyone in Shell, what are Shell's principles, the answer you would have got, I think, universally was, we don't get involved in politics and we don't bribe people. The principles were more complex than that. For example, it has the best responsibility to shareholders that I've seen, which is to protect the value of their investment and deliver an acceptable return on that investment. A very clear responsibility, I think, not maximizing, just acceptable and protect the value of their investment. So we thought we were doing pretty well with these principles, but clearly they weren't working or were missing things. So we ran a very big program with 80 workshops around the world in different countries, different languages. Each workshop had 12 Shell people. No Shell people went to 2 workshops, and the Shell people were a slice through the company in that country or area, from the top to recent joiners. And the other 12 people were opinion formers, so press, civil society, etc., governments, and so on. And we asked, the question asked was, what are the responsibilities of a major global company in the late 20th, going on 21st century? And the response we got was fascinating. They said, that's very interesting. Nobody's asked us before. We're happy to talk about it. So talk they did. And out of that came, we said, how should we modify our existing principles? And they came up with 3 suggestions. One, a redefinition of the political involvement. They said, you can't say you're not involved in politics. As a major economic player, you are involved in politics. So don't dodge it. What are your responsibilities? And the other was a commitment to human rights. And the last one was a commitment to the most difficult in many ways, to sustainable development. So we went back to our interlocutors and said, here we are. And they said, that's fine, that's great, but they're just words. Now you have to report on them. And out of that came the first Shell sustainability report in the late 1990s. So that's the kind of history of it. And rooted in that is talking to people and engaging with civil society and others. And at the same time, we in Shell were one of the early members of the United Nations Global Compact, set up by the late Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General, who called on business to support the major conventions of the UN on human rights, working conditions, etc., environment, and so on. And called on civil society and labor unions to join in this process. And that was part of his genius, to bring this collection together, not just business, but business as part of society. That's kind of the background.
Which I believe you call that in your book the citizen's hat versus the corporate hat. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, I do think it's important for businesses time and again, you see an issue arises in relation to business activities in society, and business gets together and says, okay, here's what we need to do. And then when they've done that, they go to civil society and say, here's what we think we should do. What do you think about it? But I always say, if you present a sort of fait accompli to the Archangel Gabriel, he'll still have some quibbles over it. It's the wrong way round. You should, at the beginning, say, here's the problem. How do we as society, civil society, labor unions, and so on, how do we collectively address it?
Which kind of goes back, in a sense, to the culture that was in the organization with its executive team. I guess that kind of lent towards being able to facilitate that.
Yes, it did, I think.
You mentioned the relationship with Sarawia. My pronunciation is not
Sarawia.
Sarawia. Thank you. And there's a quote, and not necessarily labeling him with this, but in terms of people that you've had to deal with around the world, and you use the expression "dining with the devil." Do you want to just sort of, which basically was meaning working with dictators and corrupt regimes, etc. And do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, certainly. If you're in something, a major a major part of the economy, inevitably, in any economy, you will come into contact with the person running the country, whose principles may be very far from yours. Now, there are two approaches. One approach, favored by some, is to say, just don't have anything to do with the company, keep out of it. I think that's short-sighted. We had an initiative in the Global Compact called Business for Peace to say business has a role for making fair and rational agreements across fractious boundaries. And if you can run a business sticking to your own principles clearly in terms of employment, then you can actually be a positive contribution and a positive example in the country. But then you will come into contact, perhaps to discuss the role of business. If you go back to the Sarawia thing, because of our feeling we're not involved in politics, this is a Nigerian problem, we will call for a fair trial, but do nothing more than that. With hindsight, we should have done more. We should have gone and talked to the government and said, look, this is not in your interest. It's not in our interest. Stay away from it, and don't be so foolish, as it were, as to execute someone who you see as a problem and a pain in the neck, because it's not going to solve your problem nor our problem. To give another example, in Syria, with the late President Hafez al-Assad, we had a situation where we had oil production in Syria, well run. It was important to the Syrian economy, but we could not pay our Syrian engineers a fair wage, and not to international standards. So if they were working in Egypt, we could pay them as expatriates. If Egyptians were working in Syria, we could pay them as expatriates. We couldn't pay Syrians because of the overhang of other government things. So one of the questions I had for President Assad is, can we please fix this? Will you allow us? Otherwise, these people work for Shell for a little while and then off they go and work in some other country where they can be properly paid. And then you get into a relationship. The first time I met him, I was told I had half an hour. After 45 minutes, we hadn't actually got off religion because he was fascinated to know that there were Suryani Christians in Malaysia, both Orthodox and Catholic Suryanis. He said he knew they were in southern India, but not there. And so we were discussing, heretical, and he, various Christian, because he said, you Christians are very split up. You're always arguing about this, that, and the other. And I remember him saying to his, through the interpreter, saying, the interpreter said, this is a matter of the material of Christ's body. And Assad, who spoke perfectly good English, said in English, substance, substance. So he was obviously familiar with the Nicene Creed.
Yeah.
Anyway, you could then have a discussion with him.
Yeah.
And that I think is part of the Quakerly approach of answering that of God in everyone.
Yeah.
And if you can talk about it addressing the humanity, everyone has this flash of humanity. And if you can fan it into life, you might make progress.
That's very good. And I was thinking about what you were saying. It's, if organizations make judgments on where they do business and where they don't do business, based on lots of different criteria, we can kind of maybe all rally around things like human rights or corruption. But one of the problems, of course, is that if a business, in my view, sort of takes that position, then they'll probably do business nowhere. Because even in this country, there is in the United Kingdom, there's corruption, and so let's all stop our business, and then of course that's just going to make things worse.
Exactly. I think there is to show that you can run in a corrupt country with widespread corruption, a clean business without corruption is I think an important example. And in Syria, for example, I knew that Hafez al-Assad knew through his multiple secret services that we were not bribing his ministers.
He respected that because that ties back to the initial question. It's about integrity. And then moving in the same sort of vein, just picking up on the decision, moral courage, really, but based on integrity. If we have a value system, and of course, at one point you came into conflict with Tony Blair. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on that?
Yes, it was during it was an energy crisis with the refineries in the UK being blockaded, and this was causing a major disruption. Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and we had a meeting with the industry, and he said, well, there are police outside the refineries, and it's perfectly safe for these trucks to go through and pick up the fuel in spite of the riots, because the police will protect them. And I said to him, he said, just order the trucks to go through. I said, that we cannot do. We have spent years telling drivers and others, everyone in the organization, that if you feel it's not safe, you don't do it. Put your hand up and say, sorry, we're not doing that. And I could well sympathize with somebody not wanting to drive 40 tons of inflammable fuel through a rioting crowd who might be throwing things. And you would destroy the whole concept of the individual's right to say, no, I don't think that's safe. And that's the root of safety in an industrial organization, that everyone in the organization should have the right to say, hey, stop, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, that's very valuable, and of course that goes into back to the things you said about the values, etc., and frameworks that were created. Otherwise, they're just words. And in the example you gave there in health and safety, then yeah, if it's just words, then that results in deaths. So, how did Tony Blair respond to that then? And
Well, I don't think he was particularly pleased. Actually, I was quite embarrassed. I think I felt it, that they were not treating members of their team with the respect that I mean, they were slightly making mock of some members of their own team, which personally I found quite distasteful and unacceptable. And I would like to think that we would never have done that in our organization.
Thank you.
It was to do with John Prescott and so
on. Yes. Well, we will steer away from the controversies, but then again, that's there's a lot to kind of think about there.